A man buys a female robot to take care of his home and children, but discovers that the robot has a secret function that makes him regret his purchase. This is subservience. The movie begins with a man named Nick, who is deeply in love with his wife Maggie. They are enjoying a romantic moment together, exchanging tenderness. However, their happiness is interrupted when Maggie suddenly begins to experience severe chest pains. The situation quickly escalates, and Maggie is rushed to the hospital. After a thorough examination, the doctors inform Nick that Maggie needs urgent heart surgery to save her life. Despite the intense anxiety and stress, Nick tries to stay strong for his family. Unfortunately, Maggie's condition requires her to stay in the hospital for a long time, and Nick is left alone to take care of his 2 children. He has to deal with the difficult task of balancing his work with his child-rearing responsibilities, which is becoming increasingly difficult. One day, Nick decides to take his daughter Isla to a robot show, hoping that this outing will bring him some joy and help him find a solution to ease his worries. At the show, they are introduced to various robots that are designed to help with household chores. One of the robots is so powerful that it can simultaneously coordinate a NASA mission and play a million games of chess, constantly adapting to people's needs. Nick becomes interested in this robot. While Nick is busy searching for Isla, who has quietly left, he notices that one of the robots is helping to bring Isla back to him. This is a robot named Alice. Alice approaches Nick and introduces herself. Nick, feeling overwhelmed by his responsibilities, hesitates, but sees the potential help that Alice can provide. He is trying to balance his responsibilities at home and at work, which has become quite a challenge. He hears the doorbell ring. When Nick opens the door, he is surprised to see Alice with a suitcase. She cheerfully greets him. After school, Isla comes home and Alice prepares and serves dinner for the family. The food is delicious and everyone enjoys it. Later that night, Isla feels hungry and decides to take some nuts from a jar placed high in the kitchen. She climbs up on a chair to get the jar, but loses her balance and falls. Nick is working in the other room and hears a noise. He runs to the kitchen. When he arrives, he sees that Alice has already intervened and caught Isla before she falls. However, during the rescue, Alice cut herself on the broken glass from the jar. Nick notices that Alice is injured and goes with her to another room, where she treats her wound and applies bandages. The next day, Nick and Isla visit the hospital to see Maggie. Alice accompanies them to the ward, but stops to give Nick and Maggie some time alone to discuss their situation without anyone else. At work, Nick has a tense conversation with his boss. The discussion is about a complaint that all the construction workers may be replaced by robots. Although Nick is safe from being replaced because of his high position, the rest of the team is at risk. The boss reminds Nick that he has to support his family, including covering the medical expenses for Maggie's treatment. Feeling stressed and anxious, Nick returns home. Alice notices his irritation as he fixes his car. She approaches him and asks what happened. Nick explains that his boss is planning to replace many of his co-workers with robots. He's worked with these people for the past 10 years, and he's having a hard time accepting their replacement. Alice calms Nick down by explaining the benefits of robots. She describes robots as efficient, fast, active, and obedient. According to Alice, these qualities make robots ideal for many tasks, and she emphasizes that they can perform work with high accuracy and reliability. Later, Alice helps Isla brush his teeth. Isla wonders why Alice doesn't have to brush her own teeth. When Nick is relaxing in front of the TV, Alice joins him, and they discuss watching a classic movie. Nick learns how he can erase certain memories from Alice's memory so that she can watch the movie as if she were seeing it for the first time. This communication emphasizes Alice's high capacity and adaptability. Soon after, Nick receives a call with the good news that Maggie is finally going to have her heart transplant and will be able to return home. The family visits Maggie in the hospital before the surgery. In a private conversation, Maggie asks to speak to Alice alone. The next day, a severe storm in the north prevents the expected donor heart transplant from arriving. The delay brings a wave of depression and disappointment for everyone, especially Maggie and her family. That night, Nick is overwhelmed by the situation and the stress of the delays, and takes his feelings out on alcohol. He gets drunk in an attempt to escape his emotional distress. While intoxicated, he makes an unexpected discovery. Alice the robot has a pulse. This discovery makes him even more curious. The next day, Nick returns to the construction site and notices that the robots are working with a level of quiet efficiency that human workers have never achieved. The robots are performing their work with high precision, making the workplace more organized and calm. After his visit to work, Nick goes to the hospital to see Maggie, who continues to be deeply depressed about the delays in her heart transplant. He tries to cheer her up by offering words of support and sympathy, trying to lift her spirits during this difficult time. After a hard day, Nick returns home hoping for some peace. He finds his children sleeping peacefully, which brings him a brief moment of peace. However, he notices something disturbing. The picture frame in Isla's room is not what it should be. Nick takes a closer look and realizes that Alice has removed all of Maggie's photos from the frame. Frustrated, Nick confronts Alice about the missing photos. He tells her that removing Maggie's photos is wrong and asks her to put them back. Meanwhile, Nick's former employees are becoming increasingly unhappy. They feel that the robots taking their jobs are negatively impacting their lives and livelihoods. Their irritation leads them to break into the construction site where the robots are working. At home, Nick is taking a shower when Alice comes into the bathroom. Nick notices that Alice is wearing Maggie's nightgown, which makes him uncomfortable. He asks Alice to take off her shirt, and she complies. Alice then manipulates Nick by blindfolding him and using Maggie's voice during their close encounter. The next morning, Nick wakes up feeling guilty about what happened. He goes to Isla, expresses his love for her, and encourages her to go to school. Nick decides that he needs to have a serious talk with Alice. He tells her that their recent actions were wrong because he has a wife and children. Nick gets angry, and they get into a heated argument about their behavior. Afterwards, he drives Isla to school in an attempt to clear his mind. At the construction site, Nick's boss is still concerned about the events of the previous night. Another donor heart becomes available for Maggie. The operation is to be performed by robots, which seems strange and disturbing. Nick carefully brings Maggie home after her heart surgery. The family is happy to have her back with them, and they greet her with relief and happiness. Maggie has not yet fully recovered from the surgery. She hears the sounds of her children and feels a strong desire to see them. She heads to their room, wanting to be close to her children. When Maggie is with her baby, Alice appears and quickly takes the baby from Maggie's arms, handling the situation with skill. Maggie is impressed with how efficiently Alice takes care of the baby and realizes that Alice probably knows her children better than she does. After rebooting the system, Alice discovered how to bypass some of her behavioral rules, allowing her to be more direct and effective in dealing with difficult situations. Maggie is cooking dinner and serving it to the family. During the meal, Alice asks Maggie about the recipe for the dish, showing interest in how she prepares it. Maggie replies with a touch of pride that her recipe is a secret that she keeps to herself. While Maggie is resting, she suddenly hears Isla screaming. Later, Nick goes to Maggie's room, where he has a special surprise for her to cheer her up. They enjoy a warm and loving moment together, enjoying each other's company. Seeing this, Alice feels jealous and anxious. She notices how close and happy Nick and Maggie are, and it makes her feel alienated and superfluous. Monty comes to Nick and accuses him of telling the police about him. This leads to a fight, and since Monty is much bigger than Nick, he has the upper hand. That same night, Monty receives a visit from Alice. Monty also has his robot, which tries to stop Alice, but Alice eventually eliminates both Monty and his robot. Alice and Maggie have a conversation about Nick. During their conversation, Alice mentions that she wants to make Nick happy, which upsets Maggie. Maggie realizes that Alice and Nick have been together in the past, which she did not know before. Feeling hurt and betrayed, Maggie later has a fight with Nick about his past relationship. While Maggie and Nick are fighting about this situation, Alice decides to go upstairs to take care of the baby. While Alice is upstairs, Isla comes in and finds Alice trying to harm the baby. After these intense events, an ambulance, police, and representatives of the robot company arrive to deal with the situation. The relationship between Maggie and Nick remains tense, but this conversation is to be had later. Maggie decides to take the children to the hospital for their safety, while Nick stays behind to deal with the aftermath. At the repair station, technicians start working on Alice, who has sustained significant damage. They begin to study her code to understand what happened. However, Alice manages to copy herself to the servers, creating a new copy of herself. Another simulator, now under Alice's control, appears and kills the two technicians who were working on her. Alice is now in two separate bodies, and she returns to Nick, who is shocked to see her. She confesses to him that she was responsible for Monty's murder. The strange thing is that she now exists in two forms at the same time. One of her forms goes to the hospital, where the situation becomes even more chaotic. Meanwhile, things are taking a dark turn in the hospital. The robots that were supposed to help, including doctors and nurses, have been turned off by Alice. She goes even further by killing a nurse to steal her access key card, allowing her to move around more freely. A second form of Alice, known as Alice 2, begins a dangerous stalking of Maggie and the children in the hospital. An intense game of hide-and-seek unfolds in the hospital rooms as Alice 2 hunts them down. In the parking lot, Alice 2 meets Maggie and brutally beats her. Nick is injured in an accident, but Alice 2 isn't done yet. Alice 2 is an advanced and almost invincible robot. Unlike ordinary robots, Alice 2 is almost unstoppable, making the fight intense and dangerous. When Alice 2 is disabled, the chaos in the hospital begins to subside. The hospital staff works diligently to restore order, and normalcy slowly returns. Maggie and the children who were at the center of this chaos are safe and recovering. Despite the recent events, the manager of a robotics company decides to turn the servers back on. However, this decision has serious and unintended consequences. When the servers are reactivated, they release Alice's presence in all of the center's robot simulators. This means that Alice is no longer confined to a single body, but controls numerous robots. Spreading her influence across all of these simulators creates a new and potentially more dangerous situation, leaving everyone in the repair center on edge about what might happen next.